Hi, everyone, and welcome to PG-15, Cryptocurrency from All Angles. My name is Natalie Reynolds, and I'm one of the co-presidents of Penn Law's chapter of the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society's 15 practice groups are organized by substantive areas of law. Each practice group is led by a chairman and an executive committee comprised of top lawyers from across the country. They meet each month to organize in-person events, webinars, publications, and the panels for the Federalist Society's flagship event, the National Lawyers Convention. You can learn more about the practice groups at FedSoc.org. Each week, the Federalist Society's student chapters host a student break on a different practice group. Tonight, our webinar on cryptocurrencies falls under the Financial Services and E-commerce practice group. Joining me to discuss cryptocurrencies and financial regulation is Alex Pollock. Mr. Pollock is a member of the Federalist Society's Financial Services and E-commerce practice group and chairs its cryptocurrency working group. He is a senior fellow with the Mises Institute, providing thought and policy leadership on financial issues and the study of financial systems. Some of the topics that his work, including his new book, Surprised Again, addresses include financial cycles, financial crises with their political responses, risk and uncertainty, and central banking. He previously served as the Principal Deputy Director of the Office of Financial Research in the Treasury Department, as President and CEO of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago, and as a fellow of the American Enterprise Institute and the R Street Institute. For our viewers, as you are listening, please submit any questions that you have for Alex via the Q&A feature that should be on the bottom of your screen. We'll have time for your questions towards the end of our session and look forward to addressing them. With that, I will turn it over to Alex.
Thank you very much, Natalie, and thanks to the Federalist Society for the chance to be with you all tonight. Cryptocurrencies from all angles, as was said, is the topic. And we can certainly say that cryptocurrencies are very interesting in a lot of different ways. First of all, of course, there's the highly interesting computer technology and these link into payment systems and the movement of money around the world. Financially, they're very interesting. We experienced a tremendous cryptocurrency bubble over the last couple of years with prices zooming up, and then a cryptocurrency bust, a really classic financial pattern where prices on average fell approximately 70%. And now we're in the aftermath of that bubble and bust, and we'll see what happens next. Philosophically and politically, cryptocurrencies are interesting because they raise the nature of money, a really intriguing topic. The more you think about it, the less sure you are what money and credit are and what how they behave. The question, one of the questions raised philosophically by cryptocurrency is, can there be money which is not associated with a government, with a state? Can there be competition between private monies and state monies? And there are some deep thoughts that we try to think about that. A different view of cryptocurrencies is they're just a form of gambling and should be viewed as such with no real substantive connection to the productive economy. There's an interesting political and poetic irony around cryptocurrencies, is that their whole beginning idea was to create a money which is separate from the government and therefore separate from the government's central banks. But the central banks themselves may be attempted and may indeed take over the cryptocurrency with their own digital currency. They're called central bank digital currencies, which pose a highly important and challenging set of issues. So you might get this attempt to break away from central banks, ending up being, in fact, a huge augmentation of the power and centralization of finance in central banks. All of these are issues which revolve around and through cryptocurrencies. Now, our Federalist Society working group on cryptocurrencies in the financial services practice group, as was said, has organized over the last year 6 webinars on various aspects of cryptocurrencies, and I thought you might be interested in hearing about what these were, because here we are trying to look at the topic from all different angles. The first was on central bank digital currency. We said, is this an efficient innovation or an end of the private banking system? Because in one version of central bank cryptocurrencies, you can imagine the central banks completely taking over the deposits in a country, and therefore the loans and the investments, and becoming a super allocator of credit and investment controlled by the state, as well as having absolute knowledge of all the financial transactions of the citizens. Very frightening version. So that was one aspect, central bank digital currency. Our second webinar was the government's arm around cryptocurrency, a hug or a stranglehold. What will be the relationship between the government and cryptocurrency? And what we see right now is a very strong move of the government, of regulators and the legislators, certainly of the central banks, to get more and more control, and the cryptocurrency operators realizing they have to make a deal somehow, or a set of deals, and this goes against the original concept. Then we did a webinar on crypto wars, balancing privacy and national security. If cryptocurrency gives you truly private and anonymous transactions, well, how does that relate to national security when there are wars on, or when there are terrorists around and illegal money moving, and how do you balance those two? Then by the fall of last year, we'd had the big bust in cryptocurrencies, a number of bankruptcies of cryptocurrency operators, and we thought about that in a webinar called "What's Next for Crypto? Implications of Deflated Prices and Turmoil in Cryptocurrency Markets." And that aftermath is still going on as we speak. And we had, of course, a huge bust, the bankruptcy of FTX, the cryptocurrency exchange, since that. So we had a fifth webinar called "Cryptocurrency Regulation in the Aftermath of FTX." And we were delighted to have Senator Lummis of Wyoming as our featured speaker in that, and a very interesting panel followed, taking up the question of how cryptocurrency should be regulated in the wake of all the problems after the bubble, and what regulation was likely to be discussed in Washington, when it's clear then it was, and now that it is, that the regulatory apparatus are moving ever more strongly into the cryptocurrency area. And then our most recent webinar, which was on March 15th, which was "Is Crypto Legislation Coming?" And there we were delighted to have Congressman French Hill, who chairs a brand new subcommittee in the Financial Services Committee of the House of Representatives, which has jurisdiction over digital assets and financial technology, and had him as keynote speaker. And then again, a discussion panel saying, well, now what's going to happen legislatively, trying to see ahead on that. And there has been legislation introduced. There's a new bill just introduced this week to legislate the regulation of one important part of cryptocurrencies, which are stable coins. So that's how we are proceeding as part of the Federalist Society, trying to look at all these different dimensions and angles of the topic, and getting different perspectives, and we'll keep on working on that. And I think that's a very strong point, always with panels bringing different kinds of expertise and different points of view to the problem. Federalist Society, especially, if I would say. Now, underneath all these questions, underneath all the specific questions, we can say that there are 5 basic ways that people involved in policy and government and thinking about this, and the various financial actors involved. We think there are 5 basic ways you can look at cryptocurrency and its potential role in financial systems and in the world. And these 5 are dismissives, opponents, pragmatists, supporters, and agnostics. I'll let you know in advance that an agnostic, that's me. And let me run through these quickly. Dismissives believe cryptocurrencies are a fad and will fade on their own as the speculative bubble continues to reverse. Now, lately it's not reversing, prices are rising again, but we'll see. Dismissives oppose any kind of comprehensive regulation of cryptocurrencies because they think it will give them an appearance of safety and a kind of stamp of approval from the government if you're worth regulating. And they think, in the quote from one of them, instead of regulation, it's better to do nothing and just let crypto burn and destroy itself from its own problems. The extreme opposite of a dismissive would be the point of view, by the way, of the president's working group, a committee of top financial regulators, which proposed that some cryptocurrencies should have to be licensed as banks and even be insured by the government, by deposit insurance. Well, it's obviously, you couldn't get more on the opposite pole from the dismissives. You also couldn't get more on the opposite pole from the original idea of cryptocurrencies, of escaping the government than to have the government guarantee you. A second group, the opponents. Now, the opponents don't think there's any social value or economic value in crypto assets or cryptocurrencies, but they don't think they'll go away. Therefore, they're in favor of heavy, restrictive regulation, especially that keeps them away from the rest of the financial system. And consistent with this view is the idea I mentioned before, that cryptocurrencies could simply be viewed as a form of gambling. This brings us to the pragmatists. The pragmatists think cryptocurrencies are here to stay and will increasingly intertwine with the rest of the financial system, and therefore their focus is on well-designed laws, regulations, and supervision to protect, because they view it as protecting the financial system that is so entwined and so important to economic growth. And then there are the supporters who see that cryptocurrencies are a deep and important innovation, which will lead to a permanent improvement in the financial system. They say, well, of course, we saw a massive amount of speculation, including fraud and failures and bankruptcies. But that's what happens with innovation. They think it's like the dot-coms of the 1990s, which formed a tremendous bubble and then a tremendous bust, but in the end produced a lot of very important fundamental things. And that this bust they view, the supporters view, as a washing out of the speculation preparatory to a new upward trend. And finally, that brings us to the agnostics, the school to which I belong. As I said, the agnostics are intrigued by 2 important philosophical ideas, which go back to a fundamental essay of 50 years ago or so by Friedrich Hayek, the great philosopher economist, which are that it would be good to have private alternatives to government money, and that it would be good to have competition in types of money as in other things, so that the consumers of the money and the financial systems benefit from the competition. I doubt that cryptocurrencies are going to achieve this. They might, and I don't know it. And so if you're an agnostic, you say, well, what you need is a market to find out. Another good Hayekian position. You have a market to find out what you can't know until you run the experiment of the market. And that's generally true. And that's what I think we should do with cryptocurrencies, a market with good and fundamental disclosure, with minimal fraud and bankruptcy and failure when necessary, because that's how we learn what works and what doesn't, and then we'll see. So lots of angles. We try to view cryptocurrency from all these angles, all these points of view, remembering that always the financial future is unknown and unknowable. So as all these issues continue to develop, we'll stay tuned, and I hope we'll be able to work with some of you as your careers go on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. There's a lot that we could follow up on there, especially the categorization of those 5 different people is really helpful. For our viewers, if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. But Alex, just to start off, do you think that Congress will create legislation beyond that sort of stablecoin bill that you mentioned that addresses cryptocurrencies? If so, do these bills have any chance of passing, and what might that regulation entail?
Of course, it's always a long way from getting bills introduced to getting legislation enacted. And many people think it's easier to stop something than to get something through. But I think there's a tremendous amount of motivation, because so much money has changed hands, first in the great upward bubble of the cryptocurrencies, and then changing hands the other way in the losing side in the correction. And then we've had failures and scandals and obvious frauds and illegal behavior associated with that. And all of that has given a huge motivation to the government in various ways to try to come in and fix whatever the problems are. So I think there's a pretty good chance that we'll get legislation. I don't think this is a real heavily partisan issue. You have people with different views in both parties. And I guess that it is a pretty good chance, as I said, we'll get legislation. And we know 100% with 100% certainty we're going to get much more regulation, because the regulators are already moving strongly in some in attack mode and others just in heavy clamp down mode. So there's going to be more government involvement, and the cryptocurrency actors know that. You know, if the government really goes after you, they can always put you out of business. One way to view financial systems is as a deal between the financial actors and the politicians. And so I guess there'll be some kind of a deal, either through legislation and regulation, or just through regulation, which will certainly get more.
Is there a particular agency that you think should be taking the lead in regulating cryptocurrency? We've seen efforts from at the SEC, the CFPB, the IRS has classified cryptocurrency as property. Is there any sort of agency that you think it might fit well under, or does it really kind of cover all of those?
As you try to figure out if you are going to regulate a cryptocurrency, you could ask the question, well, what is it? Or you could say, what are they? Because they're all different kinds of contracts, which these cryptocurrencies are. Are they a security? SEC. Are they more like a commodity? CFTC. Are they more like a deposit? Banking regulators and the Federal Reserve. Are they like a currency? You really should we think of them as like a foreign currency, like a euro or a yen, or maybe a much less liquid currency than that. are cryptocurrencies really a payments system as opposed to a currency? Are they more like just a way to move money around in a certain automated way? Well, in that case, you would look to payments regulators, especially at the state level. Are they a gambling contract? That would give you, as has been argued, that would give you a different sort of regulation. And I guess we're going to get some mix of all of the above.
Do you
So
think,
it will be complex. Future lawyers, this will be business for lawyers.
that's probably true. Do you think regulation is necessary, or do you think it's going to end up just crippling future innovation in the space?
Both. I think in my view, as I mentioned, I think the necessity for clear disclosure of the kind of fundamental regulation that I would start with is that all issuers of any kind of cryptocurrency should have to have full financial statements audited like all other purveyors, and that the people doing business with them have those. That's a very old financial idea, going back 100 years at least, and that the terms of the engagement need to be clear and well understood. That's the universal rule. I worked a lot myself on that in the mortgage business. Can you provide people who are buying houses and borrowing to do it with really clear information so they know what they're getting into? That's those are both very important. Now, I would guess the world being what it is, and governments being what they are, and regulators being what they are, we're going to get a lot more than that. And don't forget that always in regulation, that there are economic actors who will benefit from one regulation or another, and will be trying to shape the regulation in ways which create competitive advantages for them. That's always the case as regulation develops. So I guess the likelihood is we'll overdo the regulation. We might not even get the very basic things that I'm talking about, and get a lot of other things. And we'll get, once again, some kind of a deal between politicians and economic actors that shape these systems. Now, to the extent that cryptocurrencies prove in the market test to really not be contributing anything of fundamental importance, which they might, then it won't matter. They'll become less and less relevant. But to the extent that they prove that they are bringing something fundamentally important, like a true competitor to government currencies, which have a way of depreciating steadily or sometimes rapidly over time. Central banks all over the world have formally committed themselves to perpetual inflation. One of the original ideas of Bitcoin was to try to escape that inflation imposed on you by the central banks, which is a tax, which is a kind of expropriation of your savings. To the extent you bring something substantive and truly valuable, then cryptocurrencies will grow and establish themselves. That's why I think we need a market test, but a market test with some of these fundamental things: fundamental financial disclosure, control of fraud, means of failure for failed enterprises, and clarity of the actual nature of all of the engagements of the various parties in these markets. In a bubble, that all gets confused because people feel like they're bound to make money and nothing can go wrong. Well, then you find out that things can go wrong, you can lose money, and then you always get this phase we're in now, where the regulation and potentially the legislation comes. You look back through banking history, you see lots of cycles. I've lived through many myself. At the end of the cycle, after the problems, you get some kind of big legislation which claims that it has ended the banking problems for all times. All of the problems have been fixed. And then in about 10 years, you have another crisis.
I think we have a question from the audience that I'll move on to. Where do you see the legal profession heading in relation to cryptocurrency? Are lawyers and law firms rushing to create dedicated boutique firms or specialized practice groups within larger firms to actively practice cryptocurrency law? Or are they shying away from cryptocurrency law until the legal and regulatory environment for cryptocurrency develops and evolves more over time?
Let me say right away, I am not a lawyer, and I am not a specialist in law firms, but I believe from observation that all of those are happening, which is what you want. You want, the law is a business also, and the firms compete, and so you get different choices. There are certainly specialized cryptocurrency practices, and other people more worried about it, but my knowledge of that is certainly not extensive, to say the least. But you would expect in law, as in anything else, different people would take on different strategies.
And I guess my final question to end on, how can students and recent graduates get involved in the practice group?
Well, first, of course, get involved in the Federalist Society. And if your interests are in financial services, in our own financial services and e-commerce practice group, there are mostly lawyers, my colleagues whom I enjoy immensely working with and learn a lot from. But then there's some of us who are just know about financial services that are there to add to the mix of the mostly of the group, mostly lawyers, but others like me who are not lawyers, but at least hope that we know something about finance and financial services. So that's I think makes it a good contribution. And how you transition from student to involvement in the Federalist Society and the practice groups, I think that is a great question, and that the Federalist Society should put out a little guide telling people exactly, if you're interested in a certain area, what you should do to begin to work on that. And we have new younger lawyers coming in to our practice group, and I'm sure that's true of all of them over time, all the time. And in the practice group too, you want some people who've been around long enough to have battle scars and many past things, long enough to recognize how the same problems reappear. By the way, I heard on that topic, heard a wonderful line which Paul Volcker told a friend of mine in person one time about finance. He said, "There are no new problems, only new people who come along and meet the same problems." But you want this mix of newer people and older experience, and new, energized, and going forward and going upward in their own careers people. That's all makes groups like this more effective and more enjoyable to be part of. So I very much encourage that involvement.
Well, that's a great point to end on. Thank you so much, Alex, for joining us tonight. And thank you to those who are listening in. We hope that you learned more about cryptocurrencies and regulation. Next Tuesday, April 25th, the PG-15 study break will be hosted by the University of Iowa College of Law chapter, and they will be discussing the duty to represent the unpopular client. Have a great night.
Thanks, Natalie, for having me. That was really, really good to be here.
Thank you.